for our communities. So I'm going to do a quick thank you to Mike Steckloff and Samantha Vinacore-Meinrath, who's not on this call right now, but I want to thank the two of them. They are our VPs of programming and resources, and it was their incredible idea to launch this brand new webinar series called Storytellers Series, where we get to learn about a colleague in the field. They may not necessarily be in the teen space, but they work in our community and completely understand who we are and what we're doing. And I am going to give Mike the honor of introducing Joey today.
Thanks, Erica. So thank you all for being here. I'm so excited to introduce you all to my friend, Joey Eisman. So a little bit about Joey. In 2011, he was selected as a JTEEN Jewish Service Corps Fellow, where he advanced informal Jewish education experiences for teenagers and young adults in parts of Eastern Europe. He then served as a senior program manager for global engagement at BBYO, where I got the honor to get to know him, where he managed BBYO's global expansion strategy, reaching Jewish teens in over 40 countries. Joey holds an MA from Teachers College, Columbia University, and a BS from the University of Michigan. Joey is currently a doctoral student studying education psychology at Temple University, and I know from personal experience that Joey really loves to dance. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joey.
That was awesome. I enjoyed the formality of that. That was hilarious, and it's really funny because I know almost everyone on the call. So then
you have to do a little dance.
But what I actually want to say is what's fun is prior to me only working on global things, that's where I met Miriam. We actually, I think, really tried to build a bridge between the Stand With Us content and the BBYO content back when. So I am now based in Philadelphia, which has actually been a really wonderful city. The comment I made before was specific to weather. I'm from Michigan, so watching the city trying to deal with snow has been funny for me. I have essentially two goals today. I'm going to tell a bit of a story, and along the way, I'm going to stop and offer some learnings that are specific to those moments in my life. As Mike just said, I am currently a doctoral student, which means that most of my time is directed towards really thinking about very explicit details and content and going down rabbit holes of theory, content knowledge, pedagogical practices, etc. So if at any point you have questions and want to stop me, please stop me. It's not a problem. I just would prefer that you feel like this is an open space. But before I get going, I actually wanted to take a moment to have everyone go around and introduce themselves, but not specifically, this is where I'm from. I want to know if you want to share your name, which you can, but everyone's names are on here, so that's not as important. What I want to know is, what is the role you have in whatever organization you're coming from? And second, what does someone in your role do? So what is the role, and what does someone in that role do? Just to help make it easier, I'm going to calm people. So I'm going to go ahead and start us off with Lori.
Hello, everyone. I'm based in Dallas, Texas, and I work for BBYO. I'm one of the full-time staff members for a region that covers Dallas, Fort Worth, and Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I would say what I do is a variety of different things. I think that's I used to say that BBYO staff members, I mean, we have to be social workers, we have to be Jewish educators, we have to be finance directors, we have to be event managers. Right now, I think I would describe myself more in an operations supervisor role, directing a region. I hope that's an encompassing answer. And I'm going to put Danielle on the spot to go next.
I just had a feeling you were going to do that. Hi, everyone. Danielle. I am based in Houston. I am the founding director of our supplemental pluralistic community Jewish education program. And I think very similar to what Lori said, it's sometimes hard to explain what I do. And sometimes when I start to, people are like, wait, that's all you? And someone just recently wrote that down, that if you were to look on our website, it's just me who is running this program. So doing very much the coordinating and developing of our weekly education program, in addition to the finance, connecting with teens, outreach, membership, recruitment, all of those types of pieces. But I really love the helping the teens find many different opportunities to connect and engage with our Houston Jewish community. Mike, you want to go next?
Yes. So I am the director of Jewish experience at the Buffalo Jewish Federation. And I spend a lot of my time both strategizing on how to get people more engaged. I do a lot of curriculum writing. And I think the other big thing that I do is I really try to stay in relationship with as many people as possible to really find out what makes them tick and like how I can help them access Jewish content and experiences. And I am going to throw it over to Miri.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, my name is Miri. I'm the executive director of the high school department at Stand With Us, which is an international Israel education organization. I am based in New York. And someone in my role directs all the programming and content and vision and direction and everything that goes along with all the Israel education and anti-Semitism and education that we do at Stand With Us in the teen space in North America, which includes all of our teen staff and all of our students whom we work with, which includes a year-long high school internship program, a semester-long teen leadership program, one-off educational seminars for different teen institutions. So I oversee all the staff and all the students in that realm. Oh, and I'm going to kick it to Ben. Why don't you take it off?
Sure. Thank you. So I'm Ben. I'm an intern for the Center of Jewish Engagement and Learning in Buffalo. I'm born and raised in Buffalo, but right now I'm actually finishing up my senior year at the University of Michigan, go Blue. It's somebody in my role. I've been doing this internship for coming up on almost a year. And I think originally my role is trying to just kind of like absorb as much as I can and learn in my organization skills and communication and all that stuff to kind of transition into the professional life. But as I've spent more time on the job, I think my role has become more really being hands-on, developing relationships with the teens, doing event planning within the community. So I think somebody in my role does a lot of communication, outreach, and organization. So I will hand it off to Alicia.
Hi, am I off mute? Yes. So I'm the religious school director at Temple Bethel in Allentown, Pennsylvania. What I'm supposed to be doing, having to do with teens, not what I'm actually doing, is coordinating the high school program and also their youth groups. Currently, we do not have a youth group running, and this year is the first year we do not have a high school program running either. So I need to get that started up again in September, and hopefully the youth groups and everything else. But that's so I have. Did everyone already go? I'm looking and I can't see anybody that didn't.
Erica and Zipporah have not gone yet.
Hi. Then I will throw it over to you.
Okay, I'm Zipporah. I am at a Reform congregation in Orlando, Florida. Someone in my position does a lot. plans, staffs, helps find youth advisors for programming, leads our high school education program, and engages kids 0 to 18 as often and as much as we can. I'm gonna pass it to Erica.
Hey. Just to save time, because I know we've got a couple more people who just joined us too. Basically everything that everybody else has said, I do at least many of those things, most of those things. I think the only thing that maybe wasn't mentioned yet that I'll add is board relations. So I spend lots of time with my now yay amazing board. And I think, can we, hold on.
Let's
Hold on,
see,
we're gonna
Megan and Chelsea, are you with us?
Hey, I'm here.
Hello. What we're doing right now is we're just asking people to just say your name and then also what role you have in whatever organization you're coming from. And then specifically with that, what does someone in that role do? If you want to guess.
Great.
Sorry, Chelsea.
Hi. I'm gonna take my mask off. I am assistant director of special projects at New Roots, which is the young adult initiative for the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles. And I manage a service corps program for Serve the Moment. It's a response to COVID. And someone in that role, managing this project, managing this cohort, facilitating weekly learning sessions, plugging them into the community. And it's so lovely seeing so many of your faces right now. Thank you.
So good seeing you. Megan, hi. So same to you, just what's your role and what does someone in that role do?
Okay, hi everyone. I am the director of a Hebrew High in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's a 8th through 12th grade supplemental high school program. And so in my role, you know, I do everything from recruiting students, hiring teachers, organizing and planning all the classes, coming up with curriculum, working with the teachers, working with the students, programming, everything.
Everything, I love that. Thank you. So Megan, thank you so much for ending with everything, because I think that's probably how everyone feels right now, is that we do everything, which when I was also working for BBYO or when I worked with the JDC, it feels like we do a lot of different things. And one of the ways that I have always felt about people's roles in the Jewish community was that we all ran small businesses. And I want to just acknowledge the fact that there's a lot of complexity in our work. And I know that it's probably kind of funny to hear, of course, that's what we all do, all these things, because that's what people in this world do. But we often don't consider how those details with them or certain behaviors associated with them. So what I want to do today is make you essentially my co-researchers or my collaborators in this space. And as we go through and I start to pull out specific learnings, I want you to consider, what role does this fit with? Because it won't be true for every role that you have. It won't be true for the bigger role while you're here. Certain learnings exist with certain behaviors, certain self-beliefs, certain levels of self-efficacy. And sometimes those essentially help us acknowledge the fact that there's limitations to certain things that we do. So maybe if I feel like if I am the person in charge of a Hebrew high school, you can believe that there are a lot of things I do, and there are certain sub roles that I may take where certain behaviors are most appropriate. So I'm very conscientious of the way that we describe our roles, of the action orientation that we include with those roles. And I want you to consider, where does this role live? Or where does this behavior exist with which role? Because they can't all be true. There's just too many. We have too many jobs. With that, as my co-researchers or my collaborators in this topic, as someone who now does research, I want to just give you a bit of my own journey. Many of you, funny enough, have actually heard this or have heard sprinkles of it. It actually starts at the University of Michigan. Hey, Ben, go Blue. And when I was at the University of Michigan, I really wanted to do something that I thought was different, challenging. And I ended up deciding to become a neuroscience major because why not? I liked biology. I didn't want to, I don't know if that was Mary, but okay. But I wasn't also trying to become I wasn't pre-med. I just really liked neuroscience and liked the challenge of neuroscience. But at the same time, when I was studying neuroscience, I was working at my camp. I went to Camp Vermont, Canada, and I continued to do things with Rama. I went back as a counselor. I became a Rosh Hashanah or unit head, and that was part of my experience. As every summer, I would do youth programming. Also, though, during the year, I was involved with the local synagogue. It's Beth Israel Religious School, BERS, as we call it, because why not make everything an acronym? And I thought that that was also a wonderful space to explore youth programming. I ended up working with the USY chapter at the time. I was very invested in their high school programming. And I started to find that there was a lot of value in the other thing I was doing. So I was a neuroscience person. My role in my life at the time was neuroscience. And what does someone as a neuroscientist do? Is very different than the role of someone who does teen work. And those roles were in a lot of tension because the behaviors were very different. Where do I want to spend my time exploring? What do I want to consider? What do I find meaningful? Along the way, I eventually decided I wanted to serve. And more importantly, I wanted to serve abroad. So that's when I applied to go work with the JDC, specifically their Entwine program, and I became a Jewish Service Corps Fellow, working actually with the Cleveland Federation, funny enough. And it was there that I felt uniquely immersed in a community that was allowing me experimentation. I could explore what does it mean to run youth programming, explore how to create meaningful young adult programs, and bring in probably unique programs to camps that wouldn't have been experienced or expressed in a camp in America or Canada, because that's just maybe not the way that we do things. And I felt an opportunity for experimentation. And along the way, admittedly, I started to fall in love with this notion of, I feel creative. I feel like I can do something. And it feels meaningful both to my participants who told me, I hope they weren't lying, they could have been, but also for myself. And it was at the end of that time, at the end of my 13 months, I was living in Latvia specifically, that I was picked up by BBYO. And that's where actually for us, a lot of our paths crossed. And for 6 years, I worked for BBYO. And for those who know, there's lots of ups and downs at BBYO. And at the end, I look with a lot of rose-colored glasses and feel a lot of gratitude and a lot of love for the friends on the call who were with me in that journey. And it was interesting because it was there that I started to explore building community with professionals from around the world. So my job was to build and to develop a network of Jewish teens, young professionals, internationally. So I just got to fundraise all day for 6 years. It was amazing. And I learned a lot, honestly. One of the first things I learned was how to create something that felt meaningful to a lot of people. Because as you can imagine, when there's a brand associated with a program, some people feel a subject of in or out group. And this notion of in and out, we need to become flexible and permeable. That didn't exist. I'm sure many of you can acknowledge that there's some things that we do and you just can't invite the other group because there's a lot of tension with us, which is fine. I'm not trying to encourage that pluralism has to exist in every form, everywhere, at all times. It's just a belief that I have for myself personally. But what was fascinating along the way was acknowledging that role that I had. And what was that role? To build an immersive network. And what does someone do in that role? Create friendships. That's what someone does in that role. I also got to be an educator, and I also got to, in a really profound way, build BBYO's immersive travel programs in more or less a different way. I got to lead some of BBYO's premier Israel trips. I got to lead some of our premier international trips. Specifically, there was one to Bulgaria. We created new ones that went to Argentina, to United Kingdom, to Ukraine, to Uruguay and Argentina. It was amazing. Just truly amazing. It felt blessed. And to this day, I feel like there's something very beautiful about acknowledging that I can, with legitimacy, acknowledge that my work has gone to 5 continents. It feels wonderful. But I also felt tension. I lost that creativity that I felt when I was back in the Baltics, in Latvia. I didn't find myself feeling that same kind of motivation and that feeling of not necessarily autonomy specifically, but that feeling of thinking, creating, experimenting just wasn't there with me anymore. And eventually I decided that I wanted to go and get another degree. This came about following my time at the end of my tenure at BBYO. Also, I had just finished I graduated from the M squared in the fellowship or the senior cohort. So that was also a very influential moment to acknowledge the fact that there is a space for people to explore informal Jewish education, specifically for teens with me, and most importantly, intentional thought. I think a lot of us talk about intention, being intentional, kavanah, keva, all those ideas come up all the time, but I don't know how often we actually are. And I want to think about that for a moment, sit with that. No one here, when they talk about their roles, mentioned intentionality. Because so often, I'm going to guess, we feel this rush. Produce, build, create, do it again, year after year. Sometimes there's something new we introduce and it's fun and novel, but not always. A lot of what we do is actually not for innovation, but it's for maintenance, which is not a problem. It's actually important. Maintenance is just as important as innovation sometimes, if not more. But I felt like I wanted to be more intentional. So I left BBYO and I went to get a master's at Teachers College, where I studied cognitive science and education. And again, weirdly enough, I felt creative. I felt this space to explore my own notions of what does it mean to create a program in Israel? What does it mean to create a community of young professionals around the world devoted towards Jewish education? Along the way, I fell in love with the field of social and emotional learning. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the field. It has become more or less a driving force in my work. I probably would acknowledge that most of us do social and emotional learning without acknowledging it. Just for those who are not aware, social emotional learning, or SEL as it's called, there's also, by the way, a new version. It's called MESH, mental, emotional, social health. If those are interested, that's another frame of it. It's a different spin. But social emotional learning holds that there are 5 competencies that we have in this world that we have to drive towards. And those are things like self-regulation, social awareness, proper decision-making, and more. And the reason why that's important is because there was acknowledgement of what is available and important to today's youth. So if we suggest what's important for children of the 19th and 20th century to learn to be effective members of society, probably simple math knowledge, content knowledge around something, how to pull a lever if you're going to go to the assembly line, right? Just you have to be able to have rote memorization. And that's why some of you also may be familiar with this notion of 21st century skills, also called life skills. They have different names, but it's essentially this notion that there are certain skills that we have in this world that are purely taught, that you get from school. And then there are those that maybe schools should be teaching us, like flexibility, communication skills, how to work in collaborative group settings. Unfortunately, that's a newer idea. And I think a lot of us would suggest that's probably a missed opportunity for what should have been taught for a long time. Just a thing that happened. I also studied creativity, not surprising, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But I want to first give a learning, as we're coming on me talking for about 10 minutes or so. One of my favorite social emotional concepts is actually this notion of conceptual SEL and practical SEL. So because most of us here work with teens, I'm going to encourage you to consider conceptual. That means asking the questions like, well, what does it mean to be an active listener, or to have empathy for someone, or to be in a collaborative setting? It's very different when you try and encourage someone to build that skill. That specific skill is usually, unfortunately, taught to actually younger ages. So skill building for SEL is more marketed towards a elementary school audience and somewhat middle school. Middle to high school and older is conceptual learning, which does not mean that's not also skills based, because you can teach regulatory techniques, deep breathing, how to remove oneself from a bad situation. There's a lot of different things you can teach, but there's more of an emphasis on the concepts. So a unique feature. So that's why I want to start with you for a moment. I'm going to guess that everyone here has at some point had a situation where they had to lead a group facilitation, a discussion, which I'm going to start by saying that phrase alone is weighted. And I don't think the Jewish community talks enough about what is a good discussion. If you're really interested, let me know. I'm happy to talk about it, but there's a whole area of literature devoted to what is good discussion. I'm going to guess that as Jewish educators, we actually are not doing good discussion, but that's not here nor there. What I am more interested in at the moment is this notion of we are often rushing towards those deep discussions. Out of curiosity, how many people here, and you can just raise your hand if you want, feel like they are, they like the deep, meaningful content of their work, and they rush over, you know, learning about something naturally in favor of those deeper, or maybe you rush over building community because you just really want to get to the meat. Like, let's talk about how you feel about your Judaism and what is important to you and those values. How many people feel like they rush towards those bigger ideas and those deeper facilitation moves? I know I do. Yeah, some people, okay, yeah. So I want to introduce an SEL idea to you. So I'm going to slowly introduce really what my research is on, but one of the areas of research is motivation. There are two researchers who study motivation. Their names are Ryan and Deci, and they have worked for a long time on something called self-determination theory. Out of curiosity, has anyone ever heard of self-determination theory, or SDT, not the sorority? You've heard of the sorority? Okay, no, I'm joking. Yeah. So self-determination theory has three components. They are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Just to make sure we're on the same page here, does anyone want to take themselves off mute and define for me autonomy in our space of Jewish communal work? What does it mean to be autonomous? Also, by the way, I won't keep talking until someone else answers my question.
Autonomy when it comes to teens, or not autonomy when it comes to programming for teens?
Both. I don't think that there's going to be a huge difference right now.
Well, then I might be misunderstanding, but I would say autonomy when it comes to programming for teens is having the freedom to be able to program as you see fit for your specific community without necessarily having some top person, driving the vision or the content. And autonomy when it comes to teens is them feeling like individuals, a part of, separate from their families, separate from their communities, separate from their whatever, as an individual with their own identity.
Beautiful. So there's a moment of, essentially, just to simplify it, choice.
Yes.
Amazing. Okay, so autonomy has to do with choice. Competence. Who wants to define competence for us?
I think competence is the idea that, like, you feel confident and you have the skills necessarily to complete whatever task you're being given.
Beautiful. Okay, so I want to break that down because Mike hit on 2 points. There's the belief that I can, and then the actual skills to do. Those are two different components. Some of us might call the first one self-efficacy, but for now, let's bridge them together and say it's I think I can, and I actually can because I have the skill. Amazing. The last one is I'm assuming this is the easiest one, but it's called relatedness. Anyone want to take a shot and guess what relatedness means?
Like how connected things are to each other.
Exactly. It's essentially community development. Now, those are three things that we have in self-determination theory, according to the theory essentially, and I promise not to go down the rabbit hole, although gosh darn, I sure wish I could. I'm a huge nerd for those who don't know me. Those who do, like, yeah, we know. It essentially suggests that before you can engage in intrinsic motivational behavior that is engaging to the audience, you have to fulfill those three psychological needs: competence, autonomy, relatedness, or the notion of having choice, the notion that I believe I can and I actually can because I have the skills, and this notion of feeling connected or feeling community in the space I'm in. That's probably not surprising. Think about the last time you led a discussion. Do you think that the students or teens or the participants in your group would be interested if they didn't feel connected to the people around them? Would they want to engage with you? No, definitely not. If they felt like they didn't have choice to really participate, would they be as motivated? Man, do you remember being a teen? Definitely not true. Come on. And the last one is the competence, which honestly feels probably a little farther from the truth, probably farther for us. But noting the fact that if students or teens or participants feel like they don't actually have the ability to be involved because they don't have high self-efficacy for their own beliefs or their own tasks or notions of fulfilling or achieving something. If I don't think I'm going to be able to achieve something, I'm not going to try and attend to the task at hand. Come on, not going to happen. So here's the fun part. Two of those we do naturally as Jewish educators, specifically experiential Jewish educators. I want to guess which two we naturally do.
I think definitely relatedness.
Okay.
We want kids to feel part of it.
Kids feel part of it, so we naturally do relatedness. Interestingly, teachers in formal school settings are not naturally what's called autonomy supportive. Probably not surprising to a lot of us if you think back to your high school days. We don't get a lot of choice in what we do. And also interestingly, we know that autonomy and competence go together, which is also not so surprising, because do I feel like I have the choice to participate will be related on this notion of, do I think I can achieve in this space? Do I feel competent or have high self-efficacy relates to my notion of, do I want to participate and my choice to participate? Interestingly, we actually don't naturally do relatedness. We don't naturally do community building. It is part of what we do as a part of the experience. We all bake into our programs, community building, name games, icebreakers, all these things, right? That's what we do naturally in our programs, but it doesn't happen. We have to make it a part. We don't naturally do it as our experience. The reason why I bring this up is because from a social and emotional learning perspective, if we want our participants to feel able to build on notions of their own ability, to build their own notion of identity, to become competent and confident, name whatever the spaces that you're in. If it's a participant, if it's a fellow, if it's a team leader, whatever is the thing, we know we're already doing autonomy because they get to participate because they don't have to decide, they don't have to come. They are choosing to come. Just naturally part of the space. For most of us, I'm sure some of you have like their parents are making them come, but still, there's always going to be outliers. So what I'm trying to acknowledge the fact is that so often some of us rush to those deeper questions and those deeper understandings, and we neglect the fact that we actually have to build community. And I don't mean superficial, we do an icebreaker, we say our names, and then we immediately go to Shabbat, and then we immediately in Shabbat talk about what is our Jewish identity. If you believe in that term, that's a whole nother conversation. But we don't actually spend the time to actually build community thoughtfully, intentionally, and to build a sense of the psychological need or fulfill the psychological need of feeling like I can participate in this space. So my first learning for today, and I encourage you to consider, where does this learning exist in all my roles, is how much do you actually build community in a very meaningful way? We know that if we don't do it well, everything else that you want to teach your students, your participants, or your teens will not be successful, because they won't have intrinsic motivation to make it a part of their own learning. That's my first learning for today. Before I continue, does anyone have any questions about that? Because I know it's like a lot of theory and I want to make sure people feel comfortable before I move on. Thank you, Mary. Okay. Yes, Lori.
I'm just curious if you'll share later about the deep conversations resources and books that you referenced.
Do you mean things that I do, or do you mean, what do you mean?
You had said at the beginning of the conversation that that there's a lot of like literacy and resources around holding those deeper conversations, and I'm just curious about where I could learn more.
Great. I can give you a quick superficial answer. Go search my name in eJewish Philanthropy, and you'll find a paper about this topic in working with Birthright.
Wonderful. Thanks,
Yeah.
Joey.
I'm not here to be haughty, so I wasn't going to talk about it, but just for clarity, I did recently, I did edit a social emotion learning series in eJewish Philanthropy with a professional, with a professor over at JTS. So there's a whole bunch of resources that put out about this, and it's specifically a shameless plug. You know, Miri, come on. I'm not shameless. I'm shameful. No, I'm joking. It's all practitioner focused. So we give explicit, here's some things to consider. One is specifically written for a Birthright audience, but I think that the notion of don't rush over community building is the big idea. And I'm going to guess everyone here feels confident and competent in what does it mean to build community. I'll just say as a personal example, I remember being on a March of Living trip, and immediately we want to talk about what did we experience today and how does that feel and what are we thinking about and how does that relate to my identity and all these things about visiting Auschwitz. And now I realize, while we were successful, I think we probably would have been more successful if we had stopped and actually thought, what are the psychological needs for this community? And do they feel confident and comfortable communicating these deeper rooted issues or concerns about their own identity, themselves, with an audience who, from better or for worse, are new people. But they won't be new after 10 days, but they're new the first 3. So that's kind of how we think about it. Thank you for the question. Anyone else before I move on? Okay. So that's the first thing that I'm going to tell you about myself, is that I study motivation. And I study motivation in a really unique way, because part of self-determination theory suggests that there are certain underlying processes that we have that will encourage me to attend to whatever in front of me. As a teacher, I may have things that make me more attuned to my students or to my participants or my team leaders. As a participant, there might be certain things that will make me want to participate more in the space. So for all of you who lead travel programs, be it Birthright or a team tour or what have you, whenever you take participants to a novel environment, let's just say, for example, to help situate us, let's say you're on an Israel trip and you go to Kikar Rabin, you go to Rabin Square, and you try and talk about the life of Yitzhak Rabin and his legacy in the world. And how can you do that meaningfully when all the students are just focused on the fact that there's birds everywhere and there's really cool sculpture and people are honking and there's people who are like playing football in front of you? They can't. There's too much novelty of the space and there's too many distractors. So how will they be motivated to participate? There's certain things you can do. One example is you just give them some knowledge in advance. You frame the conversation on the bus. But my intention of sharing this example is that we have to be very cognizant of the motivational factors that will keep our participants engaged. For those who are interested, I'm happy to talk more about that and what are more that you can consider. But for now, I'm going to keep moving for the sake of time. So after completing my time at Teachers College, I ended up starting a PhD, which is where I am today. So in my journey, I've kind of skipped a lot, as you can probably imagine, but I really want to talk about the way in which I view my work today. So educational psychology, for those who are not aware, is a field that is devoted to the psychological processes that will help improve educational programming. Like, how do I make a student a better math learner? Or how do we encourage participants to care about social studies education, or to be better civics participants and build civic understanding? Even empathy actually is part of the conversation. So the way in which I view motivation is actually in what's called a complexity framework. Nothing that I view is deterministic, and thus there's no this influences this influences that. It's not a one-to-one-to-one. The way I view it is that all of these things are kind of circles on top of each other, influencing each other, and they're complex. That's why it's called complexity, or complex dynamic systems. If you're a nerd and want to go search that later, or if you want to nerd out with me later, let me know. But with inside of that, one of the things we think about is someone's identity. This goes back to roles. My identity in a certain space determines the behaviors I have, and that's my role. So am I a teen educator? Am I a discussion facilitator? Am I a teacher? Am I a coach? Am I a mentor? Well, the answer to all of those is yes. However, they can't all exist simultaneously, and there has to be a negotiation of when you introduce or utilize the behaviors associated with them. That's why being cognizant of your roles and recognizing where certain roles are more beneficial is important. So what are the motivations that I have in ensuring that my teens are engaging in the conversation might be influenced by the role I'm taking in the world. If I really need to be a taskmaster at the moment to make sure they're paying attention and tell them to stop talking, that's a very different space and a different role and different behavior. And then if I really want to give them, if I want to use this as a teachable, a Jewish teachable moment to talk about this notion of why it's important to listen to others and be very receptive to understanding, but still be cognizant of what you're taking in the world, different role. That's actually why I asked you at the beginning to name your role and what does a person do? Because specifically, the way that we talk about roles in this world is a person does this, a teacher does that, a mentor does this, a doctor does that, a parent does that. Those are something that a rabbi does. They're all action focused. And I really want you to consider what's the identity I'm bringing to space and how does that influence then the motivations that I'm encouraging. The last thing, which will bring us to our the last learning I have for today, is actually emotion. I do a lot of research on emotion as well. So the psychological construct of emotion, which you can imagine is really complicated. Here's the fun thing though. The way I view identity, motivation, and emotion is they're actually all the same thing, but they get influenced differently. So let me give you an analogy for a moment. Imagine that you're looking at a chair. I'm assuming most of you are sitting on a chair, so just imagine the chair you're sitting on. If you look at the chair straight on, it's still a chair. If you look at a chair from the side, it's still a chair, but it's a different angle, it's a different vantage of the chair. That's how I view different components of identity, emotion, and motivation. It's the same phenomenon. I'm just looking at it from a different angle. So I'm going to be looking at the motivational components of that issue, or the emotional components of that issue, or the identity components of that issue. So they're actually all complementary in some big way. That's just kind of, I wanted you to be aware of the biases that I have and how I think about this world, because it probably speaks directly to why I asked you at the beginning, tell me your role. Now, let me bring it to the last thing of today that I want to offer in terms of a learning. I asked everyone, or in the flyer, I said, I'm sure most of you have had some issue where you had someone come to you and say, create this program and do it today, or come up with a program and make it a thing. And then you come back to them and they're like, that's not what I wanted. Like, why don't you say what you wanted? I want to offer a way of considering using your identity, your motivation, your emotion to build something. This is also coming with creativity, just for clarity, It's called thinking within the box. I'm going to guess that most of you are familiar with thinking outside the box. I don't think that's helpful. And I know that many of you are like, but thinking outside the box is wonderful. I think it's a parlor trick. That's neither here nor there. Thinking in the box, actually, we know is a way of producing more creativity. I'll give you a quick little fun example. I have a friend who recently told me that they are not letting their child say the word gross. The child often refers to their food and says it's gross. And the parents were just sick and tired of hearing the word gross. They said, stop saying gross. So you know what the kid said? It's unlucky. It's unappetizing. This is unhealthy. So by constraining the space and not letting this child say a word, actually produced new words. It increased the creativity. Constraints create creativity. This is just a fact that we know of the world. So when you constrain your thinking, you actually are more productive and you're more creative. Going back to my point of I want to be creative. I love the notion of thinking and being intentional and being creative. So I want you to consider thinking in the box. So when someone says to you, come up with a program or come create this project, ask explicit questions and define terms. What do you mean? Define the terms in so many ways. In that way, what you do is you clarify and you build your box. So if you know, all of us know immediately, okay, we know it has to be on this date, it's this many hours, this many participants, it's going to be in this location. Those are the superficial components of our constraints, right? We all know those. But do you think about the abstract ideas that you haven't clarified? Because abstract terms need to be clarified because they're seen differently by different people. When I say the word tikkun olam or gemilut chasadim in this audience, I know we all think of something that's similar, but it may not be the same. And that's problematic because if I had a boss that said to me, I want you to create a 1-hour gemilut chasadim lecture using content from the Parsha. So I have some constraints immediately. It's 1 hour, it's use the Parsha, and it has this notion of gemilut chasadim. What I don't know is, what does gemilut chasadim mean? Define your terms. I stand by this notion of by building one's box, you are more creative. So the next time that someone says, come up with this project, spend some time at the beginning. Be intentional. Ask them, what do you mean? Now here's how it relates to what I said before. That's a very difficult role to take because often you're talking to a superior. And sometimes we don't like to ask those kind of, well, what do you mean questions because it feels like it's inappropriate. So there's an emotional component that's going to demotivate me to want to use that role of asking for clarity. I know I have. I've been sheepish around superiors before because they give me marching orders and I should know exactly what they mean. And that's not always the case. Just out of curiosity, does that resonate with anyone? Is that just a me thing? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of head shaking up and down. Good. I'm glad I'm not the only sheep here. And not like it's a negative. I'm very sheepish in that way. I was once described as being very timid, which I still find hilarious, but still.
I think that goes both ways. I also find that I ask other people to do things and I kind of have a vision in my head, but I make it too open-ended. So that's a good point.
Yes, and I think that's really a wonderful point, Alicia, that we don't often take the time to consider what does it mean to actually build a box and to work within the box. Because if I know that I have a goal of creating a social action project where specifically everyone is going to engage with our social action project for the month, it's a very different experience than if I say, go make your Gemilut Chasadim program. Honestly, sometimes it's very useful to give someone open-ended opportunities. But I'm going to guess that most of the time, when we talk to either our subordinates or superiors, someone has a vision in their head that they're not communicating well. That's when you got to build the box. And that's when you have to use a different role, which I think is a really difficult role to take. It comes with a lot of, I think, demotivating factors with a lot of negative emotion. And it's a little scary sometimes to be like, well, hey boss, what do you mean? But if you do it, chances are you're going to build a better project, be a more creative participant, and also create something that is correct on the first go around and not continue back and forth, which, gosh darn it, I'm so over back and forths. That's a bit about my journey going from the University of Michigan, go blue, to my PhD today. I hope that acknowledging the fact that your role speaks to when you include social and emotional components in your spaces. What are the motivational factors you're including? And also, how are you considering clarifying abstract concepts? We're really good about clarifying concrete notions of ideas, time, people, amount, speakers, etc. We don't do a good job of abstract concepts. With that, I'm going to open it up to see if there's any questions. Anyone has any thoughts that they want to share, anything that struck you, or if you wanted me to go into a specific area of content, I promise I did not go down any rabbit holes, which means I can promise you that there's a ton more that I'm not saying out loud.
I just want to thank you, but I have a 4 o'clock class to teach, so I got to run.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your input.
Joey, I was just going to say, I thought it was interesting when you were talking about the what you do. I actually thought you were going to go into sort of thinking about not just what we do, but who we are and how we bring who we are to our work and how that enhances our work, which I still think is completely connected to motivation and emotion and everything that you've talked about.
Yes.
But I think it's interesting that we do bring ourselves to any space, and to be mindful of where we're at in our headspace when we're walking into a program, when we're walking into a conversation, and understanding that headspace is going to impact whatever it is that we produce or whatever conversation we end up having at that point. So it just got my wheels spinning a little bit in that way too.
I love that. And I think there's a point in which we have to recognize that there's permeability between roles that we take in the world. So I'm not trying to suggest that a role is fixed and rigid. It's actually not. It's very fluid and flexible. What's interesting though is when you acknowledge the role that you're taking, you might find there's new behaviors that come out naturally. One quick example would be if you have an employee and you're an employer, or you're superior and you have subordinates. If you go into a space being a manager versus being a coach, immediately we all know the nuance of those differences, and that's the point I'm trying to make. And to add on to your point, Erica, I think there's something really beautiful about this notion of, I'm going to guess a lot of us are familiar with this, the golden circle, Simon Sinek, the start with why idea. Okay, right. So I think that he's right to an extent. Purpose is important and why we're doing something matters. But you also, to your point, Erica, have to ask, who am I in the space as well? Because the purpose and the purpose and the identity are a reciprocal relationship with each other, and one influences the other. And in a way, who I am and the role I'm taking in the space will determine what is my purpose. And so too, my purpose will help determine the role I'm taking. So why is important, and also who is important as well. You can't avoid the two, unfortunately. And I think that, listen, as much as I love Simon Sinek's work, I think he just missed that a little bit, which is, he and I study different things, that's all. I recognize we have a minute left, and I want to really respect everyone's time. Is there anything else? I'm happy to stay on, Mike, if that's tenable to you. I'm happy to continue answering questions, or if anyone has thoughts they want to share, please do.
So I just want to say, thank you. That's the easy way to say it. Joey, we really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us, for opening up this webinar opportunity, for sharing a bit about your story and the work that you're embarking upon. And hopefully we will continue to follow your work and have you back again to, continue to inform. Sorry, there's the riverboat. To to continue to inform the work that all of us are doing and how we can actually connect more meaningfully on a personal level, on a professional level with our constituencies, etc.
Thank you. And I just want to say it's been a pleasure. I don't like to do an hour of talking or 40 minutes of talking, so I appreciate everyone bearing with just listening to my voice. It's not my preference. Sorry, it's not my teaching style. But I do appreciate everyone listening and being open to these ideas. I think some of them are a little out there for some people to acknowledge the fact that they probably have different identities for different spaces. Just it makes sense. Think about when you go home, you probably regress. That's a different identity for a different space. And I want to continue to offer myself as a resource for those who are interested. I continue to build leadership content for other people and use social emotional learning and motivation concepts and identity concepts in work. So if anyone's interested, that is my email address. This is my phone number, although a lot of you already have it, which is just funny. But still, if you're interested, please be in touch. I always enjoy a good conversation and happy to nerd out on anything you want. And I will admit, one big piece of content that I really intentionally left out is really the inclusion of emotion in our work in a big way, which, not a shameless plug, Mary, but there is a piece that I did publish on this about emotional language that we use on trips. So if you are interested, you can go to EJP and read about that. And I'm happy to just have a one-on-one if anyone's ever interested. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Joey.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Hopefully, we will see you all soon. Thank you, Mike, for getting this kicked off as well.
Thanks, Erica. Thanks, Joey.
Bye.
See you later.
Have a good
Bye.
day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good